the Iranians are not going to accept a ceasefire. The Iranians are saying that this has to end permanently. And we're not going to allow the United States to walk away so that it can rebuild its arsenal and then start another war again 6 months from now and initiate it with another slaughter of elementary school kids.
Hello and welcome to the first of the Geopolitical Economy interviews, a series in which I propose to interview prominent intellectuals, scholars, politicians, and other public figures to illuminate the fast-changing political economy and geopolitical economy of our times. I'm Radhika Desai, and you are watching Radhika Desai, Geopolitical Economist. The first geopolitical economy interview is, as you see here, and as I'm very honored to say, with Professor Seyed Mohammed Marandi. He's, as many of you will know, Professor of Comparative Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he has been in the forefront of challenging the Western and, of course, the Orientalist narratives about the Middle East in general, about Gaza in recent years, and over past months, and particularly over the past 2 weeks, of course, about Iran in the midst of the greatest war that country has had to endure in modern times. Professor Marandi, as I've said, needs very little introduction, but let me say that what I particularly have been appreciating in recent days about him is that he has taken the lead in popularizing the term Epstein class to refer to the incompetent, depraved, and venal cabal that is the Western ruling class. I can't think of a more appropriate shorthand. Professor Marandi, welcome to Geopolitical Economy Interviews, and thank you so much for helping me inaugurate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and a great honor.
Yeah, and thanks. And I should also say that Professor Marandi is joining us from Tehran. And if you have a few glitches here and technical glitches and difficulties, please bear with us because, as you know, these are extremely embattled, shall we say, times in Tehran. Professor Marandi, you would agree that we are now at a serious turning point in the war on Iran. And the chief symptom of that was that on Monday evening, Donald Trump, as he does with all of his policies, after wreaking considerable destruction with threats and aggressions and so on, ultimately he chickens out. And he chickens out by claiming that he has either won a victory or is about to do so. Now, I'm not going to waste time by repeating his confusing, vague, self-contradictory words, but I want to know your view at this moment. What do you think is the significance of this moment in the war on Iran? What time is it in the clock, shall we say, of the US-Israeli assault on Iran, or shall we say the Epstein class's assault on Iraq?
It does seem that he is looking for an off-ramp. The fact that he said that the war is almost over indicates that, even though the Trump regime has achieved nothing, except for murdering children and destroying infrastructure and killing innocent people, which in the United States is normal or considered normal. But then again, we have to keep in mind that he also said the extreme opposite within hours. Within hours, he also had said that I may destroy Iran in a way in which it can never be rebuilt. And you would imagine that across the U.S. media, there would be outrage at such a threat, but there wasn't. And that is another indication of where the elites in the United States are and what the U.S. media is actually. These are just tools of the Epstein class, the oligarchy, and they care nothing about humanity or human rights. And the threat of destroying a nation with thousands of years of heritage and civilization can be said without even anyone raising eyebrows. We also saw that with regards to Cuba a while back when the Supreme Court ruled against Trump's tariffs. He said, I can destroy a country, but I can't tariff a country, or I can't impose tariffs for a single dollar against other countries. And no one really took that as an extraordinarily ugly and vicious statement that he made. Again, the media back then also was indifferent to that sort of language and that sort of threat that he makes against countries across the world. But in any case, we don't know exactly what's going on in his mind, or if we know, or we don't even know what's going on in his mind, let alone
if
to know
anything.
precisely what's going on. But it does seem that he is in trouble because we are hearing that his advisors are telling him that we need to end the war. But the thing is that the Iranians are not going to accept a ceasefire. The Iranians are saying that this has to end permanently. And we're not going to allow the United States to walk away so that it can rebuild its arsenal and then start another war again 6 months from now and initiate it with another slaughter of elementary school kids. We're not going to allow the United States to have a sword hanging over the heads of Iranian children for the years to come. So this, if there's going to be an end in the fighting, certain conditions have to be met. And that is that the United States has to recognize Iran's rights to have a peaceful nuclear program. Iran has to be fully compensated. Reparations have to be given to Iran. U.S. proxies can give them. It doesn't matter to Iran who gives them, but that has to be compensated. And U.S. proxies in the region can no longer use their territory to threaten Iran. So Qatar, the Emirates, Oman, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, they've given the U.S. regime bases, and it's through those bases that the United States conspired against Iran and attacked Iran. And that's not going to be acceptable in the future. These regimes can no longer be a platform to threaten the country. So these are issues that have to be resolved. And until then, the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed and the fighting will continue.
Yeah, and the thing is that what happens here in the West particularly is that we never hear about the destruction that Iran has been wreaking on U.S. assets in the region and on Israel. And so one has to kind of, and the reason why I think, the most Trump talked about reasons why Trump is looking for an off-ramp is, of course, the destruction that this is wreaking on the world economy, on the Gulf Strait of Hormuz being closed, oil not being able to come out, and so on. But what's really interesting is that in the Western press as well, there is also it's being noted that while we don't know exactly what's how much destruction Iran has wreaked, it is also that he may be looking for an off-ramp militarily as well. That is to say, for military reasons as well. What do you know about, or what can you say from where you are and having access to what you have access to? What has Iran been able to do militarily to U.S. assets in the region?
Well, U.S. assets have been devastated, and its bases across the Persian Gulf have been demolished. And what's remaining is going to be attacked until there's nothing left. And it's not just U.S. bases. All the U.S. assets are now fair game. And so the Iranians are striking hotels where U.S. forces are based, or wherever the U.S. interests exist for Iran, they can be targeted. And so I think that the destruction and the damage that Iran is causing to the United States is actually far greater than the damage that the United States is doing to Iran, because these tiny Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf have always been milked by the United States. The oil and gas wealth, it is sold and with US dollars almost exclusively. Then a lot of that money goes to buy arms that these regimes can never use. For example, Qatar, with a population of maybe 400,000, has all sorts of jets, but it doesn't even have the pilots to use them. They just buy them as bribes, so that the United States and the West would keep these family dictatorships in power. And of course, these are these societies are consumer societies. More imports come to these regimes in the Persian Gulf than probably anywhere else in the world. And a lot of those goods come from the West. And of course, their extra money goes to the U.S. stock market or to buy bonds. So there are many ways in which U.S. interests are being damaged, including U.S. financial institutions, U.S. assets that exist on these lands. So the damage that is being done is extraordinarily enormous, and it's irreversible in many ways. The United Arab Emirates is never going to be what it was 2 weeks ago. Nor is Qatar going to ever go back. And, Iran also has planned going to demand a fee for any ship that passes through. So it's going to teach these entities, these family dictatorships, a permanent lesson. And that is thanks to the barbarism of Trump and Netanyahu and the Zionists who've caused this war and pushed Iran in this direction. Also, of course, Iran is hammering the Israeli regime day and night with missiles. And while Western media is hiding all of this, but there are very clear indications that Israeli cities are being badly damaged. And it's very significant, I think. It's quite extraordinary that a single country, along with the axis of resistance, can stand up against the collective West because the entire NATO is behind them, including Erdogan in Turkey, because the U.S. is using its radar installations in Turkey against Iran, and NATO is actively working in Turkey against Iran. So he is a part of that anti-Iranian coalition. These regimes in the Persian Gulf that are all proxies, they are a part of that coalition. So it's really the entire West and their regional proxies that are fighting against Iran and its axis of resistance allies, and they're failing. And the Iranians, of course, have also shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to have a huge effect on the global economy. Every day, 20 million barrels of oil, roughly 20% of the world's oil production, as well as the gas that comes from Qatar predominantly, that is not reaching global markets. And while the Americans can talk down the price of oil and they can manipulate the markets for a few days, but 20 million barrels a day plus natural gas, when that accumulates over a couple more weeks, we're going to see a devastating effect on the global economy, which is not doing well anyway, and the U.S. economy, which is doing pretty badly in particular. So, and there's nothing that the United States can do about it. They spoke about naval ships accompanying tankers, but they can't do that. It's not possible. And so that damage being done to the U.S. proxies in the region and Western economies as a result of the halt of oil and gas exports and imports to the Persian Gulf region is probably is definitely far greater than even the enormous damages that have been done through missiles and drones, all on the assets, against assets in the Persian Gulf and against the Israeli regime. So this war is not going well for the United States. The Israeli regime, the Trump regime, they are murdering kids. They are bombing civilian targets constantly. They are slaughtering families. They're bombing homes and apartment blocks in Tehran. They did it again last night, the night before, during the day. And of course, the reason is that they failed militarily. They're unable to destroy Iranian drone and missile underground bases. They fail to destroy the factories that are also underground that produce these drones and missiles. And so they're taking it out on ordinary Iranians. But that doesn't make them win the war. That just makes them more criminal. But Iran, the damage that Iran is doing is enormous. Iran is being hurt as well. But the damage that can be done to the United States and the West and their proxies is far greater because Iran has been sanctioned for many years and Iran has been under siege for many years. So the damage that's done to Iran is substantial. But when you dent the entire credibility of U.S. proxies in the Persian Gulf, I don't think you can even calculate how much money that that damage has caused, because in future all that trade and business will be gone. So Iran definitely has the upper hand. And for Iran, this is not a war of choice. It's an existential war for Iran and its allies. But for the United States, it's a war of choice. They did it for the sake of Zionism and the Israeli regime. They're sacrificing their own interests and the interests of the world for this genocidal regime.
Yeah. And I, I think that from what you're saying, it seems that it's very clear that what is at stake in this war is whether the distorted structure of politics and regional politics that the United States and imperialist powers have historically created in the region is what Iran is insisting now on destroying. That Iran's aim is to destroy that so that its security, that it can be secure. And it's fascinating that, in a certain sense, if Iran succeeds in doing it, and I think that it's very likely that it will, Iran will have taken the fight against imperialism a giant leap forward, because this is where, it is persisting in a certain sense in the most dogged fashion. So where do you think Iran's resilience, Iran's strength, I should say, where does it come from? What prevents it and will prevent it, in your view, from suffering the fate that has been suffering the fate of Iraq, of Syria, Libya, countries that the United States has laid waste by its assaults and so on. It has not constructed anything. It has not got anything out of them in the sense of having a regime that will do the US's bidding. And of course, by the way, it also struck me when you were saying that the United States and Israel are taking it out now on civilians in Iran, that it further diminishes their ability of ever creating a government in Iran that will do the US's bidding, because the United States is squandering whatever little credibility it had. So where does this strength, this resilience come from, in your view?
Well, that's a very good question. You're right. I mean, through this aggression, actually, that segment, which is not very large, but it's still substantial, of Iranian society that rioted. Those young people between the ages of 16 and 22, not the ones who were trained and the weapons who killed hundreds of police officers, or the ones who destroyed hundreds of banks and hundreds of ambulances and fire trucks and so on. The ordinary kids who got caught up in the excitement and went on the streets, and they, through my own anecdotal experience and from what I'm hearing from others, they have changed, because they were naive thinking that the United States is a democracy, that it wants freedom and all that, through their Persian media empire. The West has a Persian media empire that beams into Iran all sorts of disinformation. And these people are now seeing how school children are being slaughtered, and the American regime won't even apologize for it. And it's trying to even blame the victim, as it always does. And they are seeing that they're just bombing civilian targets day and night and killing people. And the Western media is pretending as if this is some sort of legitimate war, and demonizing Iran the whole time as Iran is the victim. So this has changed even their worldview.
And I
And it
think
has further.
if you can change young teenagers' views like that, I think that's pretty telling. Um,
Exactly.
you know,
So you see that Iran is more united than before. I would also add that Iran has had as really the only independent country in this region, and probably one of a handful of really independent countries in the world, if there are any, like Iran. It has been very smart uh, in developing its own indigenous military capabilities, especially drones and missiles, and recognizing that in order to fight against an empire, you have to build up asymmetrical capabilities. But I think the real reason why Iran was able to resist is, of course, Iran is a civilizational state. But more importantly is, I think, Iran's religious ideology. Shia Islam in particular is very sensitive to protecting the oppressed, the disenfranchised, and very adamant in opposing oppression. Uh, the Prophet, the Holy Prophet himself, of course, the Quran, the son-in-law of the Prophet, but one particular chapter in history, which is very important to Shias and Iranians, of course, who are predominantly Shia, is the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet in Karbala, where he stood up against the tyrant at the time in defense of the oppressed, and the steadfastness of himself and his companions, and then the role that his sister and his household played after his martyrdom. That is something that resonates in Iran in a very big way. The day of his martyrdom, the anniversary in Iran, is unique. There's no day on the Iranian calendar
yes.
where you see people on the streets and even people who are often regularly secular and I mean secular in the sense that they don't pray or they drink and they party, but on Ashura, most of them participate in these ceremonies and these programs in one form or another. So this resilience that the Iranians have, and like in Lebanon or in Yemen, is quite unique. And when you combine all these things that I've said together, uh, for me, I was not surprised at Iran's capabilities. So that's exactly why Iran supports the Palestinians,
Yes.
because they're the oppressed against the oppressor. That's why they support Venezuela. That's why they support Cuba. That's why the Islamic Republic of Iran, supported the resistance in Southern Africa. That's why Nelson Mandela, after he was freed, he very quickly came to Iran and thanked Iran and told Ayatollah Khamenei that he called him my leader, in order to thank him. So this mentality that exists in Iran has made people steadfast, and maybe you've seen some of the footage where people in the streets every night they gather on the streets in different cities under airstrikes and missile strikes in huge numbers, many millions. Some nights maybe in the tens of millions, probably, definitely in the tens of millions. But sometimes if you look at the footage, you'll see like in Tehran or in other places, huge crowds are on the streets in the daytime too, like yesterday. And then the Israeli, or the day before yesterday, and then the Israeli and the American regimes bomb the city while people are on the streets, and people don't budge. They don't run away. They stand their ground, men, women. It's stunning. I've never seen such scenes before in my life. And those airstrikes take place very close to the gatherings of people to intimidate them, to cause a stampede so that people would be crushed. No one moves. They just chant louder. And I was at one the day before yesterday, and in Engelab, or Revolution Street, a very large gathering. Even though Tehran, a lot of people have left, the government has encouraged people to leave after the United States murdered all those children almost, I think, 180 or 70 kids. I'm not sure about the number. I don't remember. But at that school on day one, the government shut down schools and universities, encouraged people to leave. So even though Tehran, a lot of people have left, but the crowd was huge. And I was there, and they carried out these missile strikes, a very large number. No one moved. They just stood their ground and continued chanting. So I think the Americans have made a grave mistake. And if they had understood anything about Iran or Islam or the Shia ideology, they would not have carried out this war. In fact, the utter ignorance of Trump, I think, and his entourage is manifested from one of the statements that he made early on in the war. He said that I was surprised that the Iranians attacked our assets in the Persian Gulf. And that just shows that how ignorant he and the people around him are. Or maybe they did know, but they wouldn't tell him because they're Israeli firsters and they just wanted the war. But I've been telling people on different programs for over a year now, maybe more, that if the United States attacks, this is what's going to happen. It doesn't take a genius. If you understand Iran, even the basics, you would recognize that Iran is going to punish the United States and the Iranians are not going to back down. One final point, although it's not directly related to the question, is that some may say, well, during the 12-day war, Iran had the upper hand, even though it was a blitzkrieg attack carried out by the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime. But after a few days, Iran got the upper hand, and it was the Israeli regime that was begging for a ceasefire. And after 12 days, we had a halt in hostilities. Why didn't Iran continue then? The reason is that though that 12-day war, although it was successful, Iran saw many of its shortcomings. And they knew that if that war continued, the Americans would get involved. And so they thought that they would accept a halt in hostilities and prepare themselves for the big war. And since then, they've been working 24 hours a day. And so this time around, you see that the Americans have been, they've been far less military success. The Americans have had, and the Israeli regime have had far less military success than during the 12-day war. For example, the number of launchers that they've hit are much smaller. And the number of soldiers who've been martyred are much smaller. And the reason is that during these 8 months, Iran has been doing many things to better protect itself and its people and its soldiers and its military. And so despite the fact that the firepower now being used against Iran is, I guess, multiple 3, 4, 5, 6 than the previous war, because the U.S. Is far more powerful than the Israeli regime, even though the Israeli regime's power comes from the U.S. and the West. But all this firepower has led to less success, far less success than during the 12-day war. So even though they failed then, now with much greater firepower, they're failing even more. And so that is because some question, why did Iran stop? Iran wanted to prepare itself for this day.
Yeah, interesting. And I understand that part of the reason for Iran's military efficacy and the military setbacks that the US and Israel are suffering is because Iran has essentially destroyed their surveillance, radar, targeting, information capacities. And I think this is a very, very key point, because this modern weaponry doesn't work without that. And the entire American way of war, which has for this century anyway, has been precisely about using these smart weapons to target particular things. That is being, essentially, the rug is being pulled out from under its feet, and I believe that
almost all of this is indigenous Iranian technology.
Interesting.
This is the extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
That this is all, the superpower and this huge coalition of NATO and the West and their proxies are standing up against a nation that is basically using its own technology. True, it purchases things from Russia, some things from China, but it's basically their own capability. And I think that that is something that people across the global majority, the global South, will take note of in future, that they have to be reliant on themselves rather than purchasing expensive weapons from the United States, which they know their weaknesses and strengths. And ultimately, if the Americans or the Europeans pull the plug, none of that weaponry will be of any use. And so I think I think that the, there will be a fundamental change in the world
Change.
after this war. And the
Absolutely.
United States, its empire will decline much more rapidly. And the world will see that the empire, how vulnerable it is. And therefore, it will create greater confidence among other countries in the global South to assert their sovereignty on this evil empire.
Absolutely. And if I may, we mentioned Russia and China, particularly. President Trump was on the phone with President Putin just yesterday. On top of that, of course, we have seen that China has recently confirmed that Trump will indeed be visiting Beijing at the end of this month. How do you see the role that Russia and China are playing? Let me leave that quite open-ended. Yeah.
It was Trump who called President Putin. And I think that itself is significant. But from what I understand, they spoke a lot about the war. And that basically means that Trump is not in a good place. He wanted to win this war very swiftly, and he expected to win this war very swiftly, so that he could begin dictating terms to Russia and China. Because not only is this war part of the expansionist policies of the Zionist regime, remember what the U.S. ambassador to occupied Palestine said, to Tucker Carlson, that if the regime takes the entire region, that's fine. And of course, the Israeli regime is the most moral army in the world, according to the U.S. ambassador. What does that mean? It means that if the Israeli regime carries out genocide across the board in our region and takes all the land, he's fine with it. That is U.S. policy. That is unofficial U.S. policy. That is unofficial policy of the collective West. The official policy doesn't matter. Just like the two-state solution. The two-state solution was always a fake official policy. But always during these decades, the West was facilitating, not allowing, facilitating the collective West, the colonization of the West Bank. And whenever there would be a major outrage or a mass murder, attack on Palestinians, in order to keep their populations quiet in the West, they'd say, well, we're pursuing the two-state solution. But that was always fake. And so the real policy is the Zionist expansionism. But that is also a threat to Russia and China, because then that puts China in a very bad place, in a very dangerous place. And it puts Russia in a much weaker place, because Russian oil and gas become significantly less important. So these countries are obviously very concerned about U.S. behavior, and it is not in their interests for the United States to succeed anywhere, especially after their success in Venezuela. Hopefully, with the heroic resistance of the Iranian people and the Lebanese people and their resistance in Iraq, that things will change in future, and Venezuela can assert, the revolutionary people in Venezuela can reassert their sovereignty in future. But in any case, The success of the United States in Venezuela and the siege on Cuba, these are not good signs for Russia and China. So, but the interesting thing is that this war against Iran has cemented the relationship between Iran, Russia, and China. And because Russia and China, as I said, are deeply concerned, but also that segment of Iranian society, so the pro-Western liberals, usually wealthy people, and some students who come from wealthy families and go to good schools, they're often usually Western oriented. And a lot of those rioters, a significant segment of them came from that class. But that mentality has changed because they see that the West is completely out of control. The media, whether even the media that's anti-Trump, will not condemn him for the war. And so they see that, the West is not a democracy. The entire media, whether it's the Guardian or the Times in London, or whether it's the New York Times or Breitbart, it doesn't make a difference really when it comes to the empire. Some maybe more bombastic, some may be more, sophisticated in the language, but they're the same. And so that has caused a strong consensus in Iran that we in future have to start focusing on the global majority and just forget the West. It's a hopeless cause unless there's dramatic change in the West itself.
That would indeed be a very, very profound change. One of the things that I was thinking when you were talking about the Shiite inheritance of Iran, the religious ideology, etc. At one level, I always contrast what I would call a Richard Dawkins view of religion, where, if you are a believer, you are just completely nuts. And Marx's view of religion, where the purpose of it is to understand it historically and so on, And to me, when I do that, I mean, one of the contrasts that is coming up, as perhaps it's not a coincidence that you have popularized this term Epstein class, because the complete lack of morals, which is also, I think, comes out in the very important fact that you register, which is that today the leader of a major important country can talk about destroying another country and not provoke moral outrage. So I think this kind of elite in the West versus, in Iran, whatever you may say about it, there is some sense of moral restraint and so on, which, and I always like to say that, one of the things that is used to, one of the justifications that is used to justify the assault on Iran is that Iran possesses or will soon possess nuclear weapons. They completely forget that there is actually still in place a fatwa against nuclear weapons in Iran because they are such an inhuman a weapon, etc. So in this kind of context as well, I was particularly wanted your view because I appreciated the very nice kind of understanding you have presented in your various conversations about the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So now, how do you assess the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei? What is his significance? And also, how do you understand this literal baptism of fire he's getting? I mean, imagine becoming the leader of your country in the midst of the worst war that it has ever faced. I mean, and of course, there are also these rumors that he's been killed or he's been injured, etc. So, perhaps just say something about Mojtaba Khamenei and how you understand him and his role now.
Well, he is a high-ranking religious scholar. He's been teaching the highest levels of jurisprudence in seminaries, in the seminary in Qom for 20 years now to high-ranking students. He is fluent in at least 3 languages, Arabic and English included. His politics, I believe, would be highly informed. He's highly informed through his father. He's worked in his father's office for many years, and so he is well acquainted with what goes on in Iran and Iran's foreign policy and internal policy, its economic policy. He knows the commanders, and because of working in the office, he knows the government and the politicians. So he is well acquainted, and I would imagine he's well acquainted with the world. And I would imagine that that would mean there will be a great deal of continuity in Iran's foreign policy, and which is the important thing right now. With regards to economic policy, Ayatollah Khamenei was a strong advocate of social justice. And while we've had different administrations with very differing worldviews, both on foreign policy and on internal policy, Ayatollah Khamenei, the martyr Ayatollah Khamenei, has always tried to push governments, even the more liberal ones, towards empowering the disenfranchised class or the vulnerable classes of people, and to be more steadfast against the empire. And so I think that that will be a part of both of these will be key elements of running internal politics in future, as well as Iran's foreign policy.
Interesting. I think we should probably wrap this up now, but I do have one really important final question. Although I wanted to say one other thing as well about, you've given us a very good idea of the harm that Iran is inflicting on the United States, and its domination over the world, such as it is, will definitely diminish. And one of the elements of that is that the inflation that is bound to come with this war, if this war continues for a long time. In a certain sense, it's already done a lot of damage. And if that inflation is countered by increases in interest rates, that is going to prick the financial bubbles that are upholding the dollar system. And I think we may very well see that this war will have pricked that bubble as well. But that's, I just wanted to throw that in for completeness sake. But really, my final question, Professor Marandi, is how are you? How are your friends and your family? How have the last couple of weeks in Tehran been like? You've addressed that to some extent. But, any such, and I'm sure this has been an extremely difficult time for you, and I really appreciate that you have even doing this interview with me and some of the other ones you do, which, I watch as much to know your analysis as to see that you're okay. And of course, a lot of people have lost their lives and their health and so on. So in this profound experience that you're going, do you feel like you've understood something more deeply and realized something new, etc.? So all of these things, if you might please say something about this. Yeah.
Well, I've fought in war when Saddam Hussein, at the behest of the West, invaded Iran. I fought as a volunteer from the age of 16, and I survived 2 chemical attacks. And those chemical weapons were given to Saddam Hussein by the West, and Germany in particular. There's never been an apology or compensation for all the dead people and for all those who continue to suffer from chemical weapons and often have a very slow and painful death. That, to be very blunt, has that experience, that personal experience, has helped shape my worldview a long time ago. And that's sort of like what I was saying earlier about some of these young kids who went to the streets and who were accompanying these violent rioters and these terrorists. Now that they see death and destruction with no justification, and the collective West and the media in the West showing itself as propaganda, the mainstream media, how that has impacted these people. I mean, I have my own anecdotal experiences. 3 students have expressed from my own faculty, have expressed their own change of heart, and they wanted to see what they could do to help and to help the people in these difficult times. And others have had similar experiences. In my youth, that was my experience. I mean, I did during the revolution itself. I because I understood English. I did see and comprehend through my parents how one-sided Western media was about Iran. So the Western media supported the Shah against the people, against the revolutionaries. That I took note of. But when you actually survive a chemical attack, and then you see Western leaders speak about human rights and Western journalists um, constantly dehumanizing Iran and pretending that their governments are humane, and many of those journalists would come and see me. They'd come to my office to do interviews, and my experiences had no impact on the way in which they would view the world. And of course, my experience is one of many, many, many millions of
Thousands.
people in the country. Yeah. So, well, chemical weapons, many tens of thousands at least, but in general, their families and their friends and their relatives, many millions of people have been affected in one way or another. I have a friend who died before Corona of his chemical wounds. I'm sorry, the brother of a close friend who died of a colleague, the brother of a colleague and a close friend who died of his chemical wounds. Literally, I guess, I don't know, 30 some years
After.
after he was gassed. And imagine the suffering that he went through over those decades, increasingly being unable to breathe, always suffocating, for decades. No remorse from the West, no shock from these journalists, no change in their tone when it comes to Iran or the supposed moral high ground of the West being the good guys and us being the evil, backward and crude and cruel, Oriental, you know, regime, as they like to call it. So, for me, what I learned in the last 2 weeks is a lot, but my worldview had already been to a great deal cemented by chemical weapons. Not just my personal experiences, but my personal experiences made me more sensitive about the experiences of our people and the people of Iraq, which were also gassed by Saddam Hussein with the help of the West. In Halabja itself, Saddam massacred 6,500 people within 2 minutes. And the West continued to support him and give him more chemical weapons. And the media just, you know, either ignored it or didn't do much about it until he invaded Kuwait. And suddenly chemical weapons became a thing. So, but what I would say is that it has reinforced my views that the West, the Western Empire is an utterly evil empire. That Zionism is the great evil of our time. And of course, that has already been reinforced through the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the genocidal attacks against the Lebanese people whose sin is that Hezbollah and the resistance just wanted the genocide in Gaza to stop and to the ethnic cleansing and ethno-supremacism to end. So, but this has informed me, I guess, at a greater level. But two things have changed. One is that the resilience of the Iranian people has really impressed me. And that's something I also saw in Lebanon, because I was there when Seyed Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. And I saw the resilience of the supporters of the resistance despite the horrific attacks by the Israeli regime. That was also extraordinary. And I was there also at the funeral of Seyed Hassan Nasrallah, where the Israeli regime jets flew over the crowd and no one moved either. That was also quite stunning. But it was a ceasefire. This time they actually dropped bombs and people stayed stand steadfast. So that impressed me. And the second point that I think impressed me is the vulnerability of the West. I was certain that the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance would not be defeated. And I was certain that the United States would fail. But I am pleasantly surprised to see that they've actually performed. The military and of course the people, which I already spoke about, their resilience, but the military, how well they performed. And that, I think, breaks these Orientalist stereotypes that the third world, the so-called third world, a term which I hate, but the non-Western world can use technology and can use strategy and outwit and defeat a far more powerful empire, which is using its proxies, its brown sahibs across our region, whether in Ankara or in Amman or in Doha or wherever else, and of course the evil Zionist regime. But despite all of that, this non-Western state, this regime, this Oriental entity has been able to, through brilliance of its youth and its scientists, and the steadfastness of its people, and the intelligence of its policymakers, to defeat this empire.
I think what that makes me realize, of course, is that, I often think that, because I think that the sort of thing that you're talking about, the capabilities of what are called third world countries, have been, of course, increasing in a variety of ways. China is another example of this, and so on. And I think, so as a result of this, I think that we will probably soon realize that Western dominance, Western supremacy, has been a 200-year blip in the long history of humankind. Because before that, it was the East that was technologically, culturally, etc., and economically much more powerful. And then, as I said, there was this 200-year period. And is that what to turn out to be so? And I think it will. Then, of course, Iran, I think, and these days in Iran will have played a very critical role in making that blip end and human history to go back to its old course. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. I think it's been a wonderful interview. And as I say, I continue to admire your courage in doing these. Thank you very much for helping us out here to understand, because I think here also the part of the reason why we have, or let me rephrase that. I think here also the minds of people are changing. I mean, we witnessed what happened in Gaza, and that already lost the Epstein class a lot of moral authority. And I think this too is changing. This just today here in London, we heard this morning that the government is going to ban a big demonstration that was going to take place, which would have, of course, been against the war in Iran, on the grounds that somehow it is connected with anti-Semitism and so on and so forth. So we will see what happens. But the repression here continues, the censorship continues, but you are helping to break it. Thank you so much. Again, you have helped me inaugurate this. So everybody, to our audience, if you like it, please like, subscribe, share widely. This particular interview is very important, and see you again another time. Thank you and goodbye.